Hi, welcome to New Scientist Book Club. My name is Grace Wade, and I'm one of our health reporters at New Scientist. I'm so excited to be hosting today's chat about Parable of the Sower, which is one of my favorite books of all time. And the reason is because when I read it last year, I was blown away with how eerily relevant it was to the present day. So, as a quick reminder to everyone, I'm sure you all have read the book, but the novel takes place in Southern California in 2024 and follows Lauren Oya Olamina, an African American teenager, as she navigates a world crippled by climate change, income inequality, and corporate greed. Sounds kind of familiar. And here today to discuss the book with us is Nisi Shawl, who, in addition to being a science fiction writer themselves, was also a friend of Octavia Butler's. Hi, Nisi. Such a pleasure to meet you, and thanks for joining us.
Hi, Grace. I'm so glad to be here.
First, why don't you tell us a bit about you and your work? I'd love to hear more about what your writing focuses on.
I don't know that I'm the new Octavia or whatever. My work seems to focus a lot on community. Chip Delaney, who was one of Octavia's instructors, always says that authors don't know what we're writing about. That's something that readers tell us. So I've been told that my work is all about climate and climate change. I'm pretty sure it's also about community, and there's a lot about diverse voices. A ton of my stuff is really easily findable on the internet because I have a very searchable name, and a lot of it is free. For instance, a short story I wrote from a dog's point of view called Black Betty. I dedicated my first novel, Everfair, to Octavia because she knew I had a novel in me. And that one is about it's sort of an alternate history of the Belgian Congo. So there, now you know a little bit about me and my work.
And could you describe your relationship to Octavia? How long were you all friends? When did you meet?
We met well before we became friends. She was the guest of honor at a local science fiction convention, and I wrote the introduction in the program to her. And then, as a reward, they let me attend the convention, and I met her there. And I swear I was not fangirling. I was not. But I know. I was sitting outside with her, outside the hotel, some bench or something, and I looked at her and I said, "Oh, you're much more beautiful than your photos." Fortunately, she did not. She understood that I was not flattering her, that I was in earnest. Yeah, so that was how we met. And then after that, when she finally moved up here, we would go to plays or restaurants or go shopping together, that kind of stuff.
And then could you give us some insight into how Octavia spoke about the book while she was writing it and whether she had any idea that it would have the impact that it did?
She was very, very conscious of the saying that science fiction is not about the future, it's about the time that you live in. So she was conscious of trying to make it resonate in terms of the political landscape when she wrote it. She listened a lot to public radio, and she paid attention to sort of the zeitgeist, if you will, so that the things that we say are prescient were things that she picked up on in the atmosphere of what she was steeped in at the time.
It's just so interesting because it almost doesn't feel like writing for the future. Like you said, it feels, especially because I read it last year and it's 2024 now, it felt very, very much like the present to me. And so, with all that being said, it being set in 2024 in a world ravaged by climate change and income inequality and substance misuse, I was wondering why you think Octavia was able to write something more than 3 decades ago that ended up being so relevant today. I'd be really interested in hearing a bit more about like some of the current events at the time of when she was writing it that may have informed her understanding of what 2024 might look like.
There are three questions that you ask with science fiction. Not really questions, but there's what if only, and if this goes on. And she was definitely working the if this goes on vein. So, for instance, the saying, make America great again, she just took that from Reagan. I mean, that was not necessarily his straight ahead slogan, but it was what he was pushing. And then the income inequality, that was already there, especially for Black people, right? And she was very conscious of that. And what else was there? The climate was already degrading. It's been degrading for 60 years. So that was an easy one. The thing that I think she really pushed was the genius of substance abuse becoming disease and disease becoming substance abuse and the two becoming intertwined. She was very good at that. Her short story, The Evening and the Morning and the Night, demonstrates how familiar she was with those nuances and that landscape. So that, to me, the empathy as the fake empathy as a side effect of a drug, and the arsonists who really got off on fire. Those, to me, were her strokes of genius that we don't really see played out straightforwardly in today's world. But yeah, there's an underlying ethos that they evoke, I think.
Yeah, I think that was an aspect of the book that really resonated with me. I have a few people in my life who have struggled with substance use, and that is an issue that I think what you just talked about there, seeing substance use as a disease, because it is a disease, is not something that has been talked about very much until more recently. And so that was something that resonated with me. And
I
then,
can say a little bit more about the hyperempathy, if you
yeah, I
like.
would love that. I would love that. One of our book club members, actually, Alan, wanted you to speak a bit more to that as well.
So, Octavia's background, her early reading was a lot of superhero comics. And also at the time that she was just becoming aware of the world of science fiction, there was this thing called psionics, which was a fake science of telepathy. And she really wanted to include that in one of her characters. But she was also very strict about what was scientifically based. She wanted her things to be about actual science. And so she couldn't find a way to make the empathy work. So she made it a symptom of a disease, the belief in it a symptom of a disease. That's what
And
she told me.
why do you think that the hyper empathy, what do you think it added to the plot of the novel, or who Lauren was as a person? How did it influence her, this hyper empathy?
So all through her work, Octavia was talking about there's no black and white. There are no divisions between what is good and what is evil. So to have the hyper empathy made a connection between Lauren and the villains. So that was useful to her in that way. She always wanted to complicate the relationships between heroes and villains. That's what that was doing.
That's a really brilliant way of doing it. And Alan, who I just mentioned, one of our book club members, also pointed out that one of the central themes in the book was rising inequality and how that led to societal breakdown, with really only the wealthiest not being the ones who were suffering. And he was wondering whether you think Octavia would be more or less hopeful today about the state of the world.
Oh my gosh, I have wondered about that. I think she would be appalled at the state of US politics. Her take on humanity was that our fatal imbalance is our high intelligence and our strong need for hierarchy and authoritarianism. She saw those two tendencies in us as not just in conflict, but tearing us apart. And she would be aghast at how they have evolved, how intelligence has become more invested in what you receive, more interested in not just seeing what is happening, but confirming theories. And then the hierarchy component is just gone wild. I don't think she would be real happy.
The most amazing thing and like the worst thing about Parable of the Sower is how relevant it is today. And I think that would be probably a bit disheartening to her to see how relevant it still is. Another central theme in the book was religion. And, the Parable of the Sower is in the Bible. Lauren's father is a Baptist preacher. And Lauren herself is almost like a prophet, creating her own religion and, gathering her own religious following. And what I found really interesting about Earthseed is that it really didn't seem to draw on Abrahamic religions. It actually, at least to me, touched on some central tenets of Buddhism, this idea that change is inevitable. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit or give us some insight into how religion impacted Octavia's life and why it became such an important component of the novel.
First of all, I have to say that Octavia was an atheist. Some people know that, not everybody knows that, but she did respect the power of religion. She saw it as something that would move people when they were otherwise unmovable. I practiced West African tradition called Ifa, and I had her come to my home for a ceremony. It was like a feast in honor of the ancestors. She did that, and she did it happily, gladly. So she understood that it was important to me, and she understood that religion is important to people in general. But she was religion free. She really was.
Would you say she was religion free but very interested in religion? Because like I said, it seems like she has a lot of knowledge about different religions.
She was interested in all aspects of what makes humans do the things that they do. I think that mainly I would classify her attitude towards religion as one of respect, deep respect.
So speaking a bit more about, the relevance of the novel today, something that I thought was a little bit out of line with maybe how climate activism is viewed today is this idea of traveling to space. And so, climate activists today often emphasize that Earth is our home, it's our one and only planet. And there's a lot of frustration when it comes to this idea of colonizing space or using space as some sort of escape. And for a variety of reasons, right? Like space travel obviously emits a ton of carbon emissions. And then also that option, if it were to happen, would only most likely be available to the wealthiest. You can see that with Elon Musk's ambitions to travel space. And you can also see that with just last week, the first commercial spacewalk. So I was just wondering, what would Octavia think about that, and kind of where did that idea of going to space come from for her?
I think it had to have come from her early readings of science fiction. I think that was pretty much embedded in a lot of the science fiction of the 60s and early 70s. I have read some very, very funny write-ups about how it would go to colonize Mars. There is no magnetosphere. The soil is poisonous. it would be much easier to terraform Antarctica than to terraform Mars.
And
So
also escape Antarctica if needed, you know?
I think that that is one place where the novel actually falls apart. But I think that it's wise that she put this escape mechanism in the purview of religion, because that is one of the few drivers of. She compared it to building cathedrals, a multi-generation project, and a religiously driven project. She thought that space travel would be pretty much the same way.
Do you have any idea how she would react to all these ambitions by billionaires and millionaires to do that very thing?
I haven't actually thought about that. She'd probably laugh. I can hear her laughter now. But yeah, she wasn't. And I hate the thing where you say someone is a product of their time, but I think that in this instance, she was.
And then speaking a bit to the space travel component, I've also read Parable of the Talents, and I understand that Octavia actually intended to write a third book in the series, which would have focused on the earthseed community in another planet. So could you tell us a little bit more about that third book and what Octavia had planned for the series?
She had really a lot of difficulty with that because she kept coming across people who were doing things that she wanted to do. And they were like stealing her thunder, I guess. The one that I recollect the most is Jose Saramago. He wrote a book called Blindness, and one of the things that Octavia had thought about was if there was some sort of organism on the new world that caused everyone to go blind. So she was like, well, he already did it. I can't do it.
I think that's the frustration of all writers. And I mean, especially journalists, right? Like sometimes I have a story working on it and then boom, someone else did it. But
Yeah.
that at least shows that you're tapped into something that the rest of society is also attuned to.
Right.
Is there anything that you feel is often left out of the conversation when it comes to Parable of the Sower or Octavia that, you wish got brought up a bit more?
One thing that I think that doesn't get brought up a lot is that there is a great deal of intergenerational play. Lauren is very, very young, but some of the people that she travels with, and definitely her lover, are a generation removed. So there's none of this calling names or making strict divisions by who was born when. It's more about what do we care for, what are we passionate about, and I think that gets missed a lot.
Yeah. I'd like to wrap up by asking, could you speak a bit to Octavia's importance to the science fiction canon? What has her impact been in the genre and what has her influence been on other science fiction writers like yourself?
Her impact was people realizing that you could say the things that she said and people would listen. No self-censorship involved. And I say that hesitantly because, well, I was there and saw her process, and you can see from notes at the Huntington Library, for instance, that she was actively working to make her writing more positive in its impact. She was actively, I wouldn't say self-censoring, but she was struggling to make things more inviting. But she still was saying things about race and about colonialism and about gender and about sexuality that people had been told were not going to get their books sold. So that permission, that impact was there. Also, she has given rise to several scholarships. I volunteer for an organization called the Carl Brannon Society, and we administer two huge scholarships in her name. Well, actually, one scholarship that goes to two different places, but thousands of dollars. And there are others. One is for the college that she went to, and I'm sorry, I cannot remember the name. But the one that the Carl Brannon Society does is for Clarion West and Clarion for workshops that she both attended and taught at. So that's kind of a legacy right there, getting a bunch of other writers to follow in your footsteps and be brilliant in their own way.
Yeah. And could you speak also a little bit briefly here about the importance of having people from not, white, male, wealthy backgrounds working in science fiction? Like, why is it important to include those voices and perspective in the genre?
It is important to have people who are from non-dominant groups of any sort represented as authors because our perspectives are different, and the stories that we tell can be more rooted in minority experience or non-dominant, I should say, experience.
Yeah.
I have a thing that I say to kids when I'm teaching them: tell your story. Be sure that you get to tell your story, because if someone else tells it, they'll probably get it wrong. And it's very important to be able to tell your own story. And she did that.
Thank you so much, Nisi. This was really wonderful. And like I said, I'm a huge fan of this book. Me and my friends all read it together last year, and it really it opened me up to the science fiction genre. So it's been a real pleasure to chat with you and get some insight into Octavia's worldview, especially when writing the book.
Oh, I'm glad to share.